Welcome to the Otherworlds, where we talk to authors of fantasy, supernatural, and paranormal stories. Let's open the portal and meet our guest. Hello, my name is Sandra Tan, and I am joined today by Andrea Hairston. Andrea is a playwright and the author of multiple books, including Redwood and Wildfire, Lonely Stardust, and Masters of Poison. We are here today to talk about her 2006 novel, Mindscape, which is being re released. Thank you for joining us today, Andrea.
I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this book, and I must say it's interesting with a book that's being re-released 19 years later. How does that feel for you?
Um, I have a huge amount of emotion around that because it was it was my first book. So it was like my breakthrough into the world of publishing novels. I had done plays, and I think I had had an excerpt done, and I had published essays or poems, but this was my first novel. And so I was, oh my God, here it comes again. I mean, it was on Aqueduct Press, which is an independent press, not one of the big five. And now it's going to be Tor Macmillan, have more, I don't know, hopefully a wider audience. But I was really like, oh my God, will I like this book? Because I haven't looked at it. I mean, maybe I looked at it 5 or 10 years after I wrote it, but I haven't really looked at it carefully. And I got to read it, and I was shocked at how much I still liked it. So that was like a great feeling that I didn't, and I was like, no, I'm not going to edit it. I'm not going to use what I know now. This is the book. I will help people a little bit here and there, like, oh, that's a really stupid comma, or wait, move that sentence up there. But I didn't add anything or take anything away. And then I was shocked by how it still had relevance, right? So I was thinking, oh, well, that was back in 2000 and whatever. Now we're in 2025. And so, I was like glad that it still had relevance, but sad, that it should be like, oh, we've gotten through or beyond or over or around some of the things that I was writing about. And so I was like, oh my gosh, oh no, about a few of the things that I'm doing in the book that are really about right this moment. So I was struck by that. Like it was like I was getting a voice from my past, still talking to me about things that are going on in the world. And I'm just hopeful that readers are able to hang in there with the book and get, through it. And then, because I think it will reward them if they do that. So, because, I feel like I'm a better writer now. I know what I'm doing, and I know how to do the things I was trying to do in that book better now. But I don't, it's like, no, but this one's okay. That's why it got published and it won a few awards. And, right, this is, they weren't stupid. It was on like, the Philip K. Dick list, or, the the Otherwise Award, which is now a Tiptree Award, and the Carl Brandon. So people liked it. So, and I thought, oh, they must have not had much else to read or something. I had silly thoughts in my head. And then I went, no, this is why they like this book. I understand. So it felt good to appreciate how far I've come, but not feel terrible about, where I started. So, and to hope that, since it really still has a lot to say about right now, that readers will be able to, get that and appreciate that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you start off mentioning, how relevant it is because honestly, I think that this is probably one of the most relevant books that I have read in years. And it speaks so much to what's happening right now. And I actually, my feeling is that the best science fiction the best science fiction writers have this uncanny ability to tap into the future and kind of see what's coming. And you tapped into some of the changes that we are seeing in our world and our society right now. And I had actually
Right.
planned to ask you, what's the one thing that's come up over the years since this book was published that kind of hit you the hardest of like, you touched on that?
Well, I I think because I was on a panel at I can't remember, it was either ReaderCon or one of the wonderful science fiction conventions about predicting the future and how you're not actually trying to predict the future. You're looking at the present and seeing the trends and then extrapolating, saying, well, if this keeps going like this, we'll be all the way there. And so I think I create a gangster zone. That's one of the zones in the world has been divided up. So we're all in silos. So I think a couple of those things, I just meant them, I was using a metaphor and then taking it, extrapolating it. But I actually feel we're all living in our silo zones. And there is a gangster zone with the leaders being gangsters. And, in my novel, they're just straight up gangsters. But I guess a lot of the sort of authoritarian leaders around the world are, straight up gangsters. So and then that also happens to be the quote entertainment zone. So it's where they manufacture whatever narratives they want to support their power. So, I'm writing this. I started the book in the 90s and it didn't get published till 2006, but I started in like the mid 90s. And so, I was thinking, gosh, if the kinds of reality TV and all the things that I was seeing, I thought, wow, and the problems with truth and speaking truth and the commercialization of narratives and all that, I went, well, let's just take it all the way to an extreme. And here we are now in that with like, let's see how many hits you can get on the story. And this is really before the internet was as Facebook is just coming in. I started the book in 95 and Facebook is the early 2000s and the book is published 2006. So we haven't yet had the power of those social media things clarified when this book is coming out. And so I think that's one of the things that really struck me. I was like, oh my Lord. And then just, the kinds of stories that the gangsters want to tell versus, the stories that other people live, their lives. I was struck again by how, this stuff is going on. So I think, and that, the people who are trying to kind of fight the gangsters have a hard time getting together, have a hard time collecting their energy and getting over their differences. I mean, because they all agree that that's bad, but they have their own problems and the battles that they wage with one another are like getting in the way of saving themselves and everything else. So, and I didn't imagine quite that it would be quite like what it is now. So I thought I was exaggerating. And then I find maybe I wasn't exaggerating. This is like, the questions of right now, like how can we do these things that we believe in while we fight each other, while they are like, churning out narratives with a gun over their shoulders. So I think that would be, and the book is called Mindscape. So I think I'm my question are how do we deal with the stories in our heads and the stories we have on each other and the stories we tell and what we want. So, you know, that's what I was thinking about. And then here we are, we're still working on that.
Yeah, because there's a big difference between truth and perception. And
Ooh.
and you're really I feel like this is just a big part of the subtext in this book, because we're seeing how both the politicians and the entertainment people are fabricating narratives to
Yep.
suit their own agendas and whatever
Yes.
their agenda may be. And it was interesting that you mentioned about, the siloing, because one of the things that I kept thinking every time survival of the fittest came up in the book, I've been thinking like, I'm thinking, here's the real problem. Everybody's divided against each other and they're focused on the wrong threats. And so
Yes.
they can't get to that point where they can deal with,
Right.
but like there were just, there's juicy quotes about the entertainment group. Outlaw Entertainment, just a PR scam to hype the public. Life here was not played for the cameras, something that the major said. And that
Yeah.
was really pertinent because it spoke to how there's this whole segment where of one whole silo, for lack of a better term, like one place where
Yeah.
everything is about being played for the cameras.
For the cameras. Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's, like we're not in our moments, we're not in our bodies, we're not in our relationships to others, we're playing for the camera. And that's a completely different reality, and I think it's a dangerous one. And I'm a theater film person, right? So I love, making these stories, but there's a way in which now life is lived like well, in a later book, in Archangels of Funk, which came out last year, I talk about Instagrammable moments, right? And I didn't have that term then because we didn't have that then. But that's what people are, looking for, the Instagrammable moment, as opposed to what does this moment mean to you? It's how you're always like, oh, how do I look to this imagined audience? Um, and how can I get over on this imagined audience? And then people seeing those things and believing in like your Instagrammable moment and then feeling their moments. Well, what is my moment? My moment is nothing compared to this Instagrammable moment. I don't have the destination wedding, in the perfect dress with the perfect lighting. Because, those people hired people, they got cameras that are really good. They have lighting, they wore makeup, they like stage that moment, but they act like it's reality. It's just like it happened. So why aren't those moments happening for me? And so I've continued to talk about that over the years, because it got worse and worse and worse. It just kind of headed toward where I had, because that Mindscape is, like a distant future. It's not like a near future. I mean, not super distant, but it's not tomorrow or next week. It's several years from now. I mean, many years from now. And I feel like we caught up with my distant future. So it's like right now. Um, and I really, one of the things about being a theater person is that I do know the live moment. And it's actually really different than the filmed moment, right? So that there's a like in a film, anything that's going on the screen, it goes on no matter what happens in the audience. You could throw popcorn, a cat could walk across, people could scream, but the film is just going to run. In a live moment, if the cat walks across or somebody threw popcorn or you scream, then the actor can turn around and do an improv and interact with you, put you in the play and change the whole thing. And that's a very different reality. So that we're engaged with the audience, our hearts are beating. The audience's hearts sync up. This is actual, fact. They sync up watching a play and their breath syncs up. That's why the whole audience goes together, right, at something because they're all breathing. And so that moment is really different than the Instagrammable moment because you, as an audience member, aren't completely passive and just having the stuff there. You can throw popcorn at the actor, go, oh, people used to do that back in the day, theater history, like, I don't like you, get off the stage, right? So there's an immediacy to the performance, and the truth of it is slightly different than the truth of a film. And so I think we need more live moments with one another. Because even though we perform for each other, because we're always performing, we perform for each other. Like I'm different with my mother than I am with my students, than I am with my fans, or whatever. So I perform for my audience, but they're there to check me, right? And it's a rich moment because I have a whole body, you have a whole body. So things that I will say online, I will not say to your face, right? Trolls are really brave online, but they would, it's very hard to actually mount the kind of nasty that you can mount online live. It's just, it's just very hard. You have bodies, people don't get there. And so that was something I wanted to deal with in Mindscape and in all my work, like the importance of people working it out live with one another and not just living for the camera, because the camera is like a cold device. Whereas if I'm performing for you, you can call me on it and say, that's you are a full tilt diva, girl. What are you doing? And, I, I, do I react or does it burst my bubble? And I go, yeah, what am I doing? Right. So I really hope that the book and other, art experiences that people have will allow them maybe to get out of their silos and not just talk to the people who affirm everything of, like believe and see everything. Because we need other people to broaden our perspectives. No one can see everything. And I say that with trepidation because there are plenty of people I thoroughly disagree with. And then I think, okay, so some of them, okay, maybe I can't deal with it at all. But then what about the people who I 50% agree with? Like, and I can't right now, it's hard to do that if, we have that, like, we have things we all agree on, like, oh, we all agree that this is hard or bad, or, even if we have very different other perspectives, but it's hard for us to get together to work on that thing. And so that's something I'm, that's an adventure. I want to make it an adventure to work with people. It's like action adventure. It's really good. Come on, we can do it. Rather than it's like, oh God, I have to do this thing, and I hate these people, and they're disgusting. More, but eye on the prize. No, we need each other to get there. Survival of the friendliest, as opposed to survival of the quote fittest. I think the fittest are the friendliest. So,
No, it's I because I came up kind of in the blog era as well, right? In the odds. So I understand what you're saying about this transition that we've had, and it's changed the way social media has changed the way that we interact with each other, but it's also changed the way that we evaluate people because it used to be that we would hop around to different people's blogs. And so we were reading their thoughts.
wow, remember Live Journal? Live Journal?
But yeah, way
Yes.
back when, right? So,
Whoa.
but that's what we were doing, and we were commenting on people's blogs, and so
Yes.
it was a an exchange through writing, but it was a
But it
dot,
was
and it was
yeah,
exchange, and now it's like, I mean, it's nothing for you know hundreds or thousands of people to watch a video on TikTok and not leave a comment. There's no
right.
interaction in that
No,
capacity.
no,
There's no
no.
exchange of thought and
There's
ideas.
no dialogue. There's no give and take. Right.
Yeah.
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 And that contributes to that siloing that you're talking about because it isn't just groups who are siloed, but it's also individuals who are siloed. And
Yes.
and the more that we focus on the image, then the less that
Yes.
we're focusing on the issues and our
Right.
lives and how
Right.
we
Right.
help others and so all
Yeah.
of this is coming through. Like to me, like the perfect quote for what you were talking about, Ray was stranded in Aaron's fantastic visions of before the whole world was like the third world. The entertainment group could create this fantasy and take every back to how it was before and
Yes.
create this illusion. And the interesting
Yeah.
thing about that is that at one point in the book, when certain things that are really bad start happening, people start running to the entertainment people to save them. They
Yes.
don't run to politicians. They don't
No.
run to anybody. They don't run to the healthcare.
Yeah. Right. They're healers, right? Yeah. Right. Yes.
They
Yeah.
run to the entertainment group to save them, which I thought was just like that was like such a stunning moment to me in the book
Right.
because it really speaks to the power and influence that the
Right.
entertainers had in society, and it's not unlike we have this tendency to kind of in our society worship the celebrity.
Right.
I don't.
Right. Right.
Why would we worship a celebrity over a doctor? who could heal us. I mean, not that we should really be worshiping anybody, but you get what I'm saying. Like,
Right, right. Well, but I think the power of story, because, you know, if they claim the power to like make a world, then we, and then we watch them, then we actually believe we're like that. We tend to believe what we see and hear. So, I mean, and that's a survival strategy, like, right? So if I'm like, okay, look, I found the honey and I found the apples, and if we just go down that road and we'll get there, and come on and follow me, and then we all go down the road and we get there, and okay, so we actually are built to trust, right? That what we hear is truth, and if we hear it over and over again, it's certainly truth. Um, so truth is repetition often. What you hear over and over again, and it's unconscious. It's not like I'm saying, oh, well, I'll believe this stupidness. But if you hear stupidness over and over again, you don't even know why you believe it, but you've just heard it enough. And you think that you decided to believe it, right? I decided to believe this because we're egotistical, but you don't decide, like you speak the language that is around you, not the language you would like to speak, unless you actively work at that. Um, and so whatever your language, whatever, and that is visual, verbal, gestural, tells you is true, you believe in. And it's very hard to go against the truth of your culture. It's like fish saying, I don't want to be in water. I mean, really? I did see this fish though that could jump out of water and go down a hill and go back into water, and they could be out for like a half an hour. It was really awesome. So I want to like meditate on this fish. It bounced over rocks and stuff because it was too crowded, and it got to another part of the stream. And I was like, that is a metaphor. So I think we need to be like that fish, get out of our comfort zone, bounce around, and then find something else. And understand that our language, I mean, when I was well, I'm a professor, so I taught a course on ways of seeing, and that to me is partly where Mindscape comes from. The idea that I have a limited way of seeing, and I believe in the values that are encoded in my language, unconsciously, deeply, uncritically, unless I engage with them, and often unless I engage with someone who has a different set of values. So we actually need each other, and we need difference, we need diversity. So I need diversity so that I go, right, it doesn't have to be like that. Like the way it is isn't the way it has to be. It's just the way it is, and that's history, and but it's not inevitable, or it happened. And so we can unhappen it, we can change. So I think it's critical to realize that, the values you have that you really treasure, you need to evaluate your own values. And I'm not saying throw them away, but you need to like think about them. What are the implications of your deeply held points of view, your values, and all of that? And the best way to do it is actually with people who have slightly different ones. That's when I went back to the 50%. Because you don't actually need to necessarily engage with people who want to destroy you. That's not necessarily healthy. But the people who just have like a radically different view, but they don't want to destroy you, they just have a radically different view. And then engaging with them allows you to actually make up like, well, why do I believe this? Okay, so do I want to believe this, right? To ask that question. Do I need to believe this? Can I let it go? If I let it go, what does it mean? And to do that in your community is great, because then you have like a security net. You have people you trust who are, different, but you trust them. So that, if you have a community that is diverse, then that's like a rich, powerful community. That's like, whoa, then you have multiple perspectives, you have a safety net, and you have challenges, and you have people who aren't going to just take your crap, but who love you perhaps, right? That's a wonderful place to be. Or they're your friend. And despite how you can't stand that they do that, they're your friend. And they're your friend. And they were there when you needed them. And you can't stand how they do it. And you might be the one who can persuade them not to. right? Because they like you too. So those kinds of relationships are, well, they're all through Mindscape, where people are thrust together and need to depend on one another, despite their diverse perspectives. So, and I just feel that that's what we need right now. And, so that's another reason I think the book is speaking to right now.
Yeah, I would agree because and it's interesting to me that you know, one of the things that does come up in the book is that different people have had procedures so that they look different. And
Yes, yes,
and without getting into any of the particular spoilers with that, that means that
yes,
some people have changed their racial appearance. And
yes,
and it's interesting to me that there's the perception that their life will be better if they change their race, and yet at the same time, the world is still filled with severe problems. It hasn't
right.
eliminated everything.
Right.
And so there's
So
the
individual solutions, right? I will take this individual solution. Okay. Yeah. So I think, I'm a theater historian, and also I looked at the 19th century, and lots of people would pass for something other than, whatever dominant cultural thing they could pass for, they often did. Not often. I don't, like most people couldn't. Those Some of those who could did. And so I was really fascinated by this phenomenon of passing. And, people pass for all different kinds of things. But generally speaking, they passed for the what would give them more power in a hierarchical structure. Sometimes people pass for things that didn't give them more power, which is also interesting. And I want to write about that at some point. So I was struck by, trying for an individual solution rather than trying or working to change the situation such that who you look like or who you were would allow you power in your society. Um, and I didn't necessarily want to judge the person in a, like, oh, you shouldn't have passed or whatever, but to be realistic about why you made that choice. I was really, um, it was really part of what I was working on in the book too, is that we're often forced to, like be in the closet or play a role or pass for whatever, or do drag, whatever, like without letting people know we're doing it. We're like, oh, okay, I can do professional drag and I can look the way you think I should look in order to be able to take me seriously. Um, and Instead of you get to be taken seriously how you come. So that's a major aspect of the book as well. Um, One of the major characters, Lawanda, speaks in Black vernacular. And she's brilliant and she knows all this stuff and she's wonderful. Really like the character. But there were, at the time when I wrote it, people were like, why are you having your character talk like that? People were worried. There was a review, from I can't remember who it was, so that's good. Who was just so upset, in terms of, like how could I, shouldn't I uplift the Black race? And why was I having them talk like a terrible rapper or Black, whatever. So there was a lot of that at the time, and I'm hoping that that's all gone now. That's one of the things I'm hoping has utterly changed. I don't know. At least some of that's gone. But When I think at the end of the book in my acknowledgments, I talk about when I was workshopping the book, someone got really mad that Lawanda could speak German, understood physics, and also spoke in Black vernacular. Um, and that was the critique in this group. So it was really a bizarre moment at the time. I was like, whoa, because I'm fluent in German. I can do Black vernacular, and I was a math physics major as an undergraduate until I shifted the second semester of my senior year to be a theater major. And then after I graduated from college, I was a math textbook editor for a year because I had done so much, I could have, I almost was done with my other majors, but I was kind of done with some of the professors. And theater offered me, like, you could do whatever you wanted. You know, you could be who you wanted, and you could also be interested in math and physics in theater. So I went, yeah, do that, tell stories. And the problem solving was wonderful in theater. So, hey, why am I, doing this other stuff? But I could get the job as a math textbook editor because I could write and do the math. But, so I'm sitting across from you and you're denying that I exist, right? And I started Mindscape, the world from Mindscape in Germany when I was teaching at the Universität Hamburg. And I was teaching a course in Black women playwrights, rewriting the master narrative. That's the course I was teaching at the Universität Hamburg. And it was filled with all these Germans and other Europeans who really wanted to know all the playwrights, all the stories, all the stuff. So it was a great experience. But I, so I'm like, whoa, wow, I am that person. And they were telling me I didn't exist. And that was yeah, around the turn of the 21st century, right, before the book was published. And then even some of the early reviews were about that. Like, we're supposed to uplift the Black people, and Black vernacular means you're stupid, as opposed to it's a dialect, it's a language, and every language, like every language is like requires like serious mastery and serious intellect to do it well. So what? She's a writer and she writes like that. That's her voice. That was an intense experience. So I'm hoping that none of that will follow me this time around with the book. I'm hoping.
I hope so, but I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical about society.
Okay. Well, at least not as much. Not as much.
Yeah,
Right.
well, I mean, it's just the shocking racism of a statement like that.
Yeah.
Is is
Yeah.
what, because I will say, I mean, obviously I'm Caucasian. Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch.
Ah, yeah, yay,
I
wunderbar.
I lived in Germany for about 4 months, so I've spent time
Okay.
there. And I took German in high school.
Ah, yay.
Yeah, but I can spell physics. There's no way I
Right.
can teach it. I mean, like, well, but but I will also say, like, I don't think I recall in my life. I grew up in a very small town in Ontario, and
Uh-huh.
and I went to school in our school of 1,000 students. Um,
Oh,
one,
wow.
there was one black family, and
Uh-huh.
um, and they had emigrated from Guyana.
Guyana. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so from South America. Not, I think I've got the country right. Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, so there, like, I don't remember hearing anybody speak AV until I moved to Maryland.
Ah,
So
okay.
as an
Yeah.
adult, like the first time that I heard people speaking AV, I was just like, my mind was just like, like I was fascinated. It was completely new to me.
Uh-huh.
But this is what I will say. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Lawanda, because it's hard to sometimes I think it's hard to have a favorite, but if I have a favorite, then it's Lawanda.
She's my
Lawanda's
favorite.
I love her sections in the book. And I had actually I'd actually written this down, you know, well, if somebody piss on my head, I ain't never gonna call it rain. And that's Lawanda, right? That's Lawanda right there in a nutshell. And
Right.
at times she's just this stone cold realist, but Lawanda's also an optimist. And there's this
Yes.
point in the book where um she says that show me pictures of Los Santos extras dying nasty deaths, then get sexy about what we gonna do to change all that. And dumbass me, I feel this erotic thrill thinking we can save folks, thinking we ain't just a waste of good space time. Too many ethnic throwbacks be lost in the past, leading a museum life, but not me. hooking up with you, doing this treaty gig, mean I am somebody who matter in this scary universe, now and in the future, 'cause we gonna feed starving babies, stop the wars and extinctions, turn the tides of history. She
Right.
was a
That's the
realist,
one.
and she was also an optimist. She really
Yeah.
just she had such a heart that wanted to make the world a better place, and
Hope.
smart and insightful and um and hopeful despite everything.
Hopeful.
You know,
Right. Right. So
yeah,
I grew up with people like that. So I was lucky. I grew up with people who had hope despite all the crap that was happening. They had a lot of hope. Um, so that's one of my things. So I mean, because she's facing all the horror, and she still thinks we can do something, we can change. And that to me is very important. And I knew many people like that in my life. So I feel very lucky that, and they faced odds that I can't even imagine. And they were like, they're the reason I'm sitting here, right? So they faced the odds and they kept hope alive. I don't know if they were optimistic. I don't know if they knew that things were going to turn out okay, but I think they were really hopeful that if they worked hard, they if they didn't work hard, it was going to be messed up. But if they did work hard, they had a chance. So I'm part of some people call it hope punk. So my books, were really devastating, but I really believe in hope. I do personally that, we can have an effect, we can make a change. What we do matters. That, it's not time to give up. It's never time to give. You just keep going until till you pass it on to someone else.
yeah, I think.
So, and Lawanda is in that. She's definitely that kind of character.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing about even when you're projecting into what the future could look like if we keep going down this path.
Right.
Same, you're doing that, but at the same time, you're weaving this thread in here of like we can still change things. It's not
Yeah.
too late. Um,
Right.
and I feel like that's like that's important to bear in mind because like if it was all just pure depression, you know, wow, what a headache
Well,
it would be. But like like, oh my, I want to know what happens to here, what happens here, what happens with these
yeah.
guys. Like, because
Right.
there's all these people who are trying in their own ways.
Right. Right.
So
Well, I don't do dystopia, even though it's dystopic, right? I think, for me, I start with the tragedies and then figure out what we're going to do about them. That's to me as opposed to end with the tragedy. Like, let's start with the tragedy. Okay, here's a mess. And I don't actually, when I start writing, know how they're going to figure it out. So I give myself the same challenge I give my characters, like, okay, here's the mess, what can we do? Okay, you always talk about like, yeah, let's hope, all right, do it. So I feel like I have to find the way for my, story to work. And that's really important to me that I make it, um, that I find whatever I can, and there are losses and there are hard things and, but I don't think that the work we do or the struggle is in vain. Even if a character themselves doesn't necessarily get the benefit or reap the thing or whatever, but what they do matters. It's not like over. I mean, because I think, and this is not a spoiler, I start with someone being assassinated, someone who had a vision. And one could think of that as the end, oh my God, you had this vision and we shot you down. So that literally is the question, like, if the person with the vision of doing these things is taken out, what, what can we do? So, um, And I also wanted to look at the person with the vision. So, all of that was on my mind as I was writing the book.
well, it's interesting that the person who has the vision is also a very flawed person. I don't know if I want to. I think it
Yeah,
might.
no, I think that yeah, like we have to read the book to find out what's going on with the person who had the vision. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it shows that there's that balance there, and I think that in some ways, if you stop yourself from trying to do better or to help because you yourself are flawed, then we're never getting anywhere.
Yeah, right.
That's
Right. So I think we are our flaws as well as our superpowers, right? We're both things always. And it's not just, like, we have like an Achilles heel or kryptonite or whatever, but it's more, who are we and what do we want in the world, and how we've been, primed to like do things and what we rationalize so much of what we do. So how have we been set up to rationalize really bad choices? And so many of us are. I mean, it's how we are. So again, I'm in that 50% thing. Like, okay, so like maybe you thought this and that, and now you're rethinking it. Great, right? Come on, let me pull you in. I want to, you know, pull people in. You don't have to be perfect, because another thing that I feel is that we have, you know, I'm not saying we shouldn't call people out for like doing bad, but I do think we should not stop there. Like, okay, I called you out. Smack, 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 smack. Okay. And now what? So I really want to be able to figure out how to work with people, like, because I'm not going to be perfect my whole life. I'm going to do something, everybody I know is going to do something that you totally regret. And the internet is new, and that crap you do that you totally regret lives forever on the internet. Like crap you do when you're 16 lives for, like crap I did when I was 16. Luckily, it is gone. I have maybe some photographs, but I haven't been living for the camera. So it is, I don't have to like go looking for it to erase it. It is gone, you know, and I'm grateful. I don't, need people to necessarily see me struggling to become an adult and then hold that up as who I am, or cancel me, for, you know, uh, embodying my unfortunate culture, right? Like, because that's kind of what you do, until you actually work at critically thinking and evaluating and changing, which is really hard work. And our brains are set for automatic, like with pronouns. Like language is set to be automatic. It is not conscious. I mean, we speak and we think we're conscious, but we've figured it out before. Like I do my hands and then the word comes. See, the gesture came before the word come came. So I figure stuff out. I say it, and it's part of a whole really fast unconscious process in which all the rules of English are embedded. And so my access to it is limited. So I have to practice shifting it because I have said all of the things in English the way English has made us say them, because there used to be they and them used to be in English a totally normal way of talking about someone. They do blah, blah, blah. In German, sie. Sie is she, sie is they, and sie is you. So in German, you have three different groups that are all referred to as sie. And in English, you used to have they. Then we, got rid of thee and thou and shifted things around, and then they became less, grammatically correct. And grammar is just what we agree to at the moment. So, but we still, early part of the century, as we were struggling with pronouns, people were just ranting about they as if it was like natural. There's, a natural state of the language was that they is plural, as opposed to the agreed upon version of the current usage of the language, with exceptions, which is how most languages work. And then people found themselves tripping over their unconscious, right? And then having to deal with that, which is embarrassing or weird or whatever. And so now we're in this war over all of this. And it's just basically like, instead of saying, what is language for? What are we doing? How do people want to be called? Why do I get to call you what you don't want to be called? Like, Ask that question. That's a different question. And what does it do to you to call someone else what they want to be called? Because that's what the whole 21st century has been about, that I get to call you what I want to call you versus you get to say how you are referred to, right? Hey, and those are different questions. Those are questions about who has power and where power rests. And, or, if I make a mistake, I feel so terrible that then I'm defensive rather than, okay, I made a mistake, I'm on automatic and I'm going to work on it. And why don't you help me? That's a different stance to take. And so all of that has gotten really, well, I mean, it's a power struggle too, because language is also where we, by defining things, we create the future. The language creates the future. So if we say there are all these genders, then there will be those. If we say they don't exist, we're going to think that they won't be there. They'll just be hidden, which is what, has been going on. So they want the status quo. And in many cultures, there are multiple genders with multiple words, or there is no gender. Like in Yoruba, there's no he and she. There's just un. Um, so it's not natural or universal, our choices, but we actually want to believe that English is natural and universal, which is an amazing amazing amount of hubris, amazing amount of like, wow, I think all that about my language. It's the bomb, right? It's the one. It's just one of many. And it's just we have infinite reality, and language is just, the finite way we deal with it. And therefore, it's imperfect.
Well,
Um, and yeah,
it's interesting that you're saying that because in the book, Eleni says to Ray like that English just isn't sufficient to explain what she's trying to explain to him, right?
yes,
It doesn't
yes,
translate. And it's funny that
no.
when you're saying this, because how many times do people type in, there must be a German word for this, because there are all these great German words that like really nail something, and then
After it, they
English
capture it. Yes.
and English is like you've got to pull 20 words together and
You've
they
got to put, yeah, right. And German will
yeah.
just do it like, it just, I love that about German, that they have a way, and English is wonderful. It has its wonderful things. So I'm not talking about that. But the Faulenzen in German, Faulenzen, we don't, like, okay, I don't know, um, just sort of doing nothing, lazing around. I mean, see, we have to have two words, and it doesn't capture the positive feeling of it. So it doesn't necessarily do all the things that the single German word does, Schadenfreude. I mean, we just don't have that. I think we don't even have it. We just say Schadenfreude in English
We
because, yeah, we just say, okay, we're just going to go to the German and say it. And I think that that's true for every language. There's just things you can't say. And other languages do have that. And that to me is a critical, I mean, since I speak, several languages, including mathematics, there are wonderful things that you can do in mathematics to understand the world. In other words, if I think mathematically for a moment and I think about how the numbers all work together, then I get a picture of the world that is slightly different than what I can do in English. And I have to work really hard to describe like the mathematical relations. Whereas with math, I can just write them out and there they are. It's like, okay, that makes sense because this, and then therefore that. But to explain it to someone else, I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, I need like like a chapter in a book, as opposed to a one-page mathematical proof. Um, so there's math language. And then there are things that you just can't do in math, like, I mean, like to me, IQ is one of the stupidest numbers I've ever heard, when it purports to say intelligence. Now, you need like, I don't know, four numbers for just your position in space, right? For at least four, like, uh, and you only need one number to describe intelligence. So to me, it's like obviously a weak, metaphor for intelligence. In other words, the number really doesn't capture much of anything. And so to me, it's like that sort of we want to use numbers when like we really shouldn't be using numbers here. We need like, rich descriptive terms here. And we're putting a number on it. And people don't feel the number, right? 2 billion people died. Do you feel 2 billion? Do you know what 2 billion is? Can you conjure up 2 billion? No, you cannot. But if I say the whole city of New York went under the sea, you're getting closer to having an image of how large something is. And even that is, but that's just, if I tried to get to 2 billion, it would be like trying to imagine, a good quarter of the planet, right? And that is like, wow, okay, like go out in space, look back and imagine that the people on a quarter of the planet have gone. And then we're starting to get at the number, you know. So to me, one has to be mindful of what language you're in, how limited it is, and you can't just go from one to the other and expect to maintain coherence, right? It's just not going to, it's not going to work. And we need, again, all the languages to get at our really amazing reality, which is infinite. I mean, or some people argue in math that it may not be infinite. Okay. But I'll skip that part of math and say it's close. It approaches infinity. It approaches infinity.
Well, no, I mean, it's fascinating because once you start talking about numbers, they often are, yes, it's a different language, but when you're talking about like an IQ number, it can often be very dehumanizing,
Oh
really.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes.
You just strip.
What do you mean?
Yeah. And this is something else that you're touching on in the book. There's this quote, I believe it's Ray's narrative. Nobody makes big money on a cure. Nothing like they do on people who never get well. Why vaccinate when you can medicate? Oh my goodness, did that ever feel relevant to right now? And also, like, just the way that it dehumanizes instead of like, we're not talking about, Aunt Jane who has cancer and who needs treatment and whose family is struggling to take care of her. We're talking about, oh well, these people aren't going to get well, so why, or why should we bother giving them medication to get well? Like you also have in the book, this thought experiment. If you have a limited food supply, would you let healthy people starve to feed terminally ill people, to feed losers, criminals, enemies? You're nailing on like all of this in terms of like how we just start dividing people and relegating them to a term rather than an identity and stripping them of their
Right.
humanity, which is how
Right.
like, I mean, you don't necessarily explain like all the hows of how things have gotten to where they are at the beginning of the book, but I mean, it's a very bleak world in many
Mm,
respects where people really are disposable, and
right.
there's class disparity,
Yeah.
and then there's the different,
And
silos.
zones. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I found it so interesting that you're touching on both like a food crisis and a healthcare crisis in this book.
Right.
And we are on the brink of both.
Well, that's another one of those things that I didn't mean to predict. I mean, I had read a book called The Coming Plague, which was an amazing book that I read back in the 90s. And I was really struck by that book. And then I was struck by this sort of, I don't know, selfish gene Ayn Rand, like we should, like Vance, why should we, they're our enemies, why feed them? So the whole idea that we cut off aid to people who need health care and food, because it's not like we're giving it to people in our own country who need health care and food. We're just giving it as a tax break to people who already have too much. But anyhow, so and then the farmers who produced all of the food to, like the peanut butter or whatever, like they had to let their crops rot. Um, and they didn't make any money, so I mean, it was just the ripple effects of like not feeding and helping people, like wiped out people in our country who were helping to feed them. And the assumption is that you only take care of your own, whatever your own is, and that they are like, why should we feed them? Or, of course, disease does not give a crap about national origin or even, national borders, right? So, and then the unrest, the conflict, all the stuff that could happen because people are hungry isn't just going to stay local because we're, a global reality. So all of those things are not on their minds when they say, like, okay, well, whatever. And I'm just being like, that's practical. Then there's just the humanity of it. So I'm just like, even in your own stupid world, you are kicking yourself in the head. Right? Because all of this will come back to get you. It doesn't just stay local, it doesn't just stay there. And then it's like, excuse me, we don't want to save children, like a child who has whatever and could use that vaccination to survive or to, that is, fending off like, all manner of nasty. You don't want to save that little being who is our legacy, right? Because I think all the children are our children, right? So, you don't want to save the children. You don't want to save, and then that goes to everything. You don't want to save the creatures in the ocean. You don't want to save the trees. And all of it, to me is interconnected. So like thank the trees for the air you breathe. Hello. I just so that to me is like on a spiritual level, because that to me is like, whoa, like you think that everything is to be exploited or it's expendable, as opposed to these are subjects in the world with you who, pollute the river. I don't care, uh, destroy the trees, kill the babies, wipe out chocolate or whatever. We'll have a good time now. It's just a very, for me, um, spiritually empty, dehumanizing, and you thingify everything. Everything is just a thing that you can exploit, from the people to the plants to like chop down the mountain and expect your weather to stay how it was. It's just like, what are you doing? Um, and that, Carl Sagan, who I refer to a lot in this book, I mean, because one of the towns is called Sagan City. And he was the one who said, take a picture of the planet. That was one of his insights, and show it to us. Because we hadn't actually done that. So when they go out and they're flying around, they look back and they get the blue marble. And that image becomes, the pale blue dot. I mean, he wrote a book called The Pale Blue Dot. And it's a very powerful image. And when you see how thin the atmosphere is, and you realize that the magnetism is saving us from like all kinds of intense radiation, and that little thin crust of atmosphere is where we live, and the ozone layer is protecting us. And ozone there was huge holes in that layer, and we fixed it because we had an image of the pale blue dot. We had an image of the planet as a whole, as a self-regulating system that allowed us to exist as well as everything else. Um, so these people don't have that image, and that to me, and Sagan was, he didn't believe in God, but he was mystical. In that he believed that we were interconnected and that it was important to value all of everything that went on in the planet. So that to me is also part of what I'm working on in the book, that we recognize the humanity or the subjectivity of everything in the world, that we're actually subjects among other subjects, not the subject among objects. Um, and that is a different kind of relationship to beings, to plants, to people who don't speak your language, to mountains, that, that we respect the relations of what the Lakota say, all my relations. We respect all of our relations. Um, and so I feel like uh, I tried to get that into the fabric of Mindscape, even if I don't necessarily, some characters do speak about it or work toward it, and I do have the Wovoka, so I actually do get some of that in. Um, uh, but I want, again, it's an adventure to find our way to each other. Like, how can we find our way to each other? Because it's not just a given that I'm going to be able to feel the humanity of people who are different than me, or feel the subjectivity of the grass, right? That, I'm used to in my language, thinking of it as something I walked on, something I mow, something I don't care about, that it's there for my aesthetic pleasure. It's not there for itself. It doesn't have a life of its own. It's only in, and if I want to plant grass rather than clover, then that's fine too. Even if bees would really rather have clover, and that, maybe we should have grass, do something, other things. Um, it, it, it's hard to get people to understand that the values we have are, again, encoded in our language. We say it about all of those things. And it's a lot of work to change, because there's so many aspects of it that we have to do, and it can seem overwhelming, like, oh my God, how am I going to do all this? So what I was trying to do in the book is show us that we can just take whatever step we can, right? Everybody's taking a different step, and it all matters. And then other people say, well, try this too. So, they like try to pull you into whatever they're doing. And sometimes you don't go. You just say, no, I got to focus on what I'm doing. And that's okay, so that you don't have to be like everything to everyone all the time, but working together, then you can create enough change to change the direction we're all going. So I think that is what I was working on in the um, all the different elements, like bringing them together, so that we had, again, that thing of like, not like just saying, oh, well, I can make money on people being sick, or I can't make money on people being sick. And that's my question, not health.
Yeah, no,
It's,
okay, well, no, it's just interesting that there are all these little threads that pull together. The scientists are disappearing. The politician is making a power play. 89% of the Los Santos population is illiterate. And then there's going to be a health scare. And and all of these things tie together in ways that matter because, you know, it's funny, I was just having this conversation with my husband the other day. I said, in school they will talk about closed systems, and I remember this from high
right,
school. And I said, in my opinion, there's no such thing as a closed system because everything is inside of something else,
right,
and it keeps going.
right,
And so,
right.
sure, you might think that what's inside this glass jar with its lid sealed tight,
Oh, right.
closed system.
Momentarily closed system, sort of,
Exactly. Yeah, well, and what's in there? It got in there from out
from
here,
out here.
right?
Right,
So it's everything matters and it all ties together. And it's made me think a lot about
right,
USAID and about farm workers not
yeah,
being available and crops rotting
right,
and COVID vaccines
right,
going away and
right,
funding healthcare research and
right. All of that.
all
Yeah,
of this, all of what's happening right now, this all
yeah,
of those threads are in this book, which is why
right.
everybody needs to go and read it. So,
Yay.
no,
Yes.
I could talk to you for another hour, truly. And but we should wrap this up. And you've already answered my
Okay.
question about who your favorite character is. So
Lawanda.
let's wrap
Yeah.
this up by asking if there is one thing for people, one thing for them to take away from this. What is the one thing that you hope they'll take away from Mindscape?
I think that they are important, that they have the key to changing the world. It's right with them, and they just have to open themselves up to it. right? But they have it. So I want people to feel like they matter and that they can do what needs to be done. Because the choices they make to address many of those things are all the things that need to be done. So that's what I want people to feel. I want people to feel empowered.
Well, that's a powerful message for people to take away. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Mindscape.
Yes, this has been so much fun.
I'm so glad that this book is getting a re-release and that it's getting a wider release. So I hope that a lot of people get a chance to pick it up and discover it.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. You're a wonderful interviewer. I felt totally comfortable. I felt like I could just talk. And I appreciate your questions and your insights. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.